Yeah, we can start.
Yeah. Welcome everyone to the second panel discussion of the day and the second day of the thesis symposium at the School of Environment and Architecture. This panel is titled Off Screens and Projections, where three discussants and presenters will present their ideas around notions of screens and projections, of dreams, of the cinematic space, and of this and the space of physical and metaphysical boundaries. We have three discussants today in the following order. Sneha Pawar will discuss the idea of a dream house, and she is exploring the question, where does the idea of dream house come from? And to kind of respond to this answer, she explores practices, routines, and the fissures that emerge between dreams and aspirations, as found in the settlement of Malegaon, in the city of Malegaon. Ardev Bhattacharya will look at explores the question, how does cinema and cinematic techniques produce certain kind of experience for the viewers, and at the same time help construct kind of a meaning for the world that we inhabit through the idea of cinema. And lastly, we have Anshuli Kadam, who looks at how the interplay of social difference and affordances of the built form shape our idea of fear and pleasure. Yeah, and we have three respondents to these participants: Sarovar Zaidi, Vishwanath Kashikar, and Prasad Khanulkar, who are here with us since morning. And with that, I will invite Sneha to begin her presentation, followed by Arikdev and Anshulika. Sneha, you here? If you're on mute, then we can't hear you. Sneha?
Yeah.
Sorry, there's a lot of noise around me. I'll just mute myself.
Hi. Am I audible now?
Yes, you are. Yes, you are.
Hi. So today I'll be presenting my thesis titled The Dream House. A home of our own is something that everyone aspires to have one day, a house of our dreams. And we all have an idea with which we imagine of how it should be, where it should be, and we work towards that. This study revolves around the development and the architectural practices associated with it, aspirations and dreams of people in the small town of Malegaon in Maharashtra. Life practices and routines of people here are very different as compared to major cities like Mumbai. But the recent development in the housing sector is a lot like that, which is the apartment type. So, with the notions and beliefs of people here being so diverse, I think it's unfair to impose them with a certain type of housing. So, what is an ideal home for these people, and what is their idea of a dream house? When we talk about our dream house, our minds immediately start thinking about how fancy and luxurious we want it to be. But our dream space is where we might experience this undeniable discomfort, a space that our mind creates subconsciously, but with a multitude of all thoughts, memories, experiences, and desires to sustain and enhance our ongoing sense of ourself and the world. Then the idea of the dream house changes. It's not somewhere in the mountains or the riverside or a silent space away from the city. It's the space that our mind creates. And the thought of looking for it in our actual dreams never really stops. So, what is an ideal home for these people in Malegaon, and what is their idea of a dream house? So, the idea of a dream house is
Sneha, we lost you in between. Do you want to maybe quickly start again?
yeah, sorry.
Yeah.
A home of our own is something that everyone.
Maybe the last part, no? Not from the beginning, like the last two sentences.
Okay. So the question is, what is an ideal home for these people in Malegaon, and what is their idea of a dream house? Because when we start thinking about dream house, we immediately start thinking about how fancy and luxurious we want it to be. And but our dream spaces are something where we might feel this undeniable discomfort, a space that our mind creates subconsciously with a multitude of all the thoughts, our memories, our experiences and desires to sustain our ongoing sense of the self and the world. So the idea of the dream house then changes, and it's not somewhere into the mountains or on the riverside or a silent space away from the city. It's somewhere, it's the space that our mind creates for ourselves. And the thought of looking for it in our actual dreams never really strike us. But then questioning this process, where did the idea of the house come into our minds other than the dream? Because then is the idea of the dream so mundane where every single person dreams to have a house, but then when we actually look at it, we find that the house is actually something that
We lost her again.
Yeah. We'll just wait for her to come.
Just send her a message, otherwise she'll go on.
yes,
Yeah,
yes.
yeah. Devarsh, are you doing that?
Am I audible?
Yeah, Sneha, we lost you at the sentence where you said, the idea of the house is mundane.
Yeah.
Yeah, can you start from there?
Yeah. So so yeah, is the idea of the dream house so mundane where every single person dreams to have a house, but then when we actually look at it, we find that the idea of the house is actually something that
Should I present her on her behalf?
Yeah, yeah. If Devarsh is around, please tell
am I
him to.
still not audible?
Sneha, I think we're losing your connection.
Sneha, I have opened your presentation. Should I share the screen and
Yes,
you
yes.
can
Yeah,
tell
and
me
maybe
when to
what you
go?
can do is, if it helps, turn off your video and speak.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Tell me when to go next, huh, Sneha?
Yeah. You can go next.
Yeah, go to the, yeah.
Is the audio fine now? Should
Yes.
I start?
Yeah.
Yeah. So our dreams don't always make sense, but it's an important idea of space that needs to be understood. They are a form of energy that one feels, and it is beyond this idea of a imagined idea of a home. The realm of dreams and desires is fundamentally different from reality, especially because that place can't be revisited. It's where the space, time, and order collapses. So, from where do we construct the idea of designing a space with straight walls, smoother floors, proportionate rooms, and linear pathways? Why do we seek such clarity in real spaces when the dreams are so fragmented and absurd? So, to understand the spatial quality of the dreamscapes, I looked at concepts like rhetorical dreaming, creative dreaming, and psychospatiality. Ashwin, go next, please. And to understand dreams, identifying the signals, events, and forces that we experience while dreaming is important. Next. So, for the drawing methodology, to bring in the interviews and dreams in the form of drawings, I looked at work of artists working with surrealistic form of art. So, this is The Farm by John Miro. Next. And this is The Monkey in the Jungle by Henry Rousseau. So these drawings really bring out the space of the other realm with a nudge of surrealism. Also, when you look closer into them, they allow you to discover things and give a glimpse of the space. And through this form of drawings, it truly depicts the absurd nature of our subconscious. Next. So each drawing is a depiction of a dream of the interview taken. And this is how I first started out with drawing. Next. But the fact that we don't see from a certain distance in our dreams and everything is sort of closer to our sight. So to bring that in, I focused on creating that one frame of the dream. Next. So this is the series of dreams that I have mapped. He is a farmer and owns a pomegranate field. He often dreams about what he can do more for his crops and tries to find solutions to his problems. He describes this as his worst nightmare. When he reached his farm, he saw that it was all ruined. All the crops had rotten and fallen down. He was trying to figure out the way to save his farm from the plague. Next. Her dreams are usually about visiting a yatra or a mela with her family. On her way back home, she suddenly encounters a lot of snakes and a continuous fear of these snakes following her back home. She tries to get rid of them and reach home. She dreamed about this for quite some time and she couldn't understand why. And so she spoke to a pandit about it, who suggested that fasting on Mondays might help her with her dreams about snakes, and it actually did. Her dreams are mostly about her mother and her memories. She lost her mother when she was too young and can vividly remember her face. In her dreams, she follows the shadow of her mother into the mountains and the wilderness. Next. A dream of being caught in a loop of a never ending staircase in the middle of the forest, which she has been climbing for quite a while. After reaching a certain height, suddenly her past fear of falling from a height kicks in, and then that's all she can feel until she's short of breath and wakes up. Next. In her dream, she walks on the path with giant fruit trees. She plucks one fruit and starts eating them, and she couldn't stop eating the fruits as if she was compelled to do so. She's a very religious person and is devoted to Sadhguru. He suddenly appears in front of her in her dream and wants her to stop eating the fruits, otherwise her stomach will burst. Saying this, he disappears and she stops eating the fruits. That day, he had visited a bank to apply for a loan for his shop. He owns a small scale sari shop. When he returned, he kept thinking about the loan the whole day, and he dreamed about that the very night. He dreamed that his loan was accepted, and he had got this exceptionally huge amount of money. And when he reached the shop, the whole room was full of money, and the shelves were stocked with new saris, and the money was pouring through it all. Next. She dreams of a table full of food on the seaside, dishes prepared by herself in her own restaurant. She often has this similar dream of a seaside restaurant. She's a great cook for real and wants to have her own restaurant someday. And she thinks that her dreams are the visions of the place she wants to be one day. And she often even dreams of recipes and tries them after waking up. Her dreams are mostly about the dead, people she has lost, known or unknown. She sees dead bodies lying around, people sitting, crying, and mourning the dead. So the drawings really help us see through and beyond the meaning of dreams, also exploring and understanding the dreamscapes better. All the dreams have some connecting link to the memories of their past lives, revealing their anxieties, beliefs, or incidents. They bring out the hidden senses of pleasure, the eroticism, the sense of self indulgence, and anxiety, which we keep buried inside ourselves. We try to find refuge in reality, outlining these thoughts. So, to arrive at the spatial argument, in our dreams, our mind only focuses on important symbols and events happening. And that might be the reason we don't fully understand or get the whole sense of space in our dreams. They can therefore be metaphorically represented or depicted as a space or the surrounding, a space that can serve an individual exploring their dreams or patterns of their dreams. So the spatial conclusions from interview or and the readings are the feeling of being disoriented in the wilderness. Next, the non-cultural and random landscape of our dream world, spaces where the difference between the controlled and the uncontrolled environment dissolves and it all appears the same. So the controlled here is our reality and the uncontrolled being the dreams. In reality, we sort of have control over things, but that is what is not happening in our dreams. As articulated theoretically by Freud, the use of architecture in the environment of domestic has opened up problems around the identity of self, the other, the body, and its absence. However, the problems interpreting the relationship between the psyche and the dwelling, the body and the house, the individual and the metropolis have remained undealt with. So, to conclude it, and the use of this research is to work out a new method to form or create a space, and so we could focus on the psychospatial nature of the space which exists outside the mainstream architectural discourse. Architectural spaces have always responded to the aspirational aspect, which are in the realm of need, shaped by the socio-economic conditions. However, this idea of the dream is disjunct from the idea of our dreams, which we actually experience while sleeping. And that space is very instinctual, in that the idea of space is different. Everything happens immediately and it's not permanent. It does not have a foreground and it does not have logics. The fact that we always imagine our dream house to be in the forest or into the mountains or on the seaside or the riverside is because it offers that feeling of wilderness, the uncertainty, or the fear or anxiety of being lost or just being in that space, which is absent in the reality. So, can there be a space for individuals to experience the dreams, the wilderness? It would be a space to lose control and get lost in the absurdity of it. This thesis aims to rethink the house of the dreams and to draw out the space of fears, desires, emotions, and pleasures, which will eventually be the space of their dreams. Thank you.
Thanks, Sneha. Ardev, if you're around, we can start with your
presentation. Thank you, Shreyank. 1 second, I'll just. Is my screen visible?
Yes.
Okay, so I'll begin.
Go to the
good afternoon, everyone. This is Arkdev, and I'm presenting my thesis titled Cinema Space. The art of making cinema has been practiced for over 100 years. Since its inception, we, as an audience, have been exposed to two different realms. The one in which we live in, the physical realm, designed by architecture, and another one that we visually experience in cinema. These realms closely resemble each other, yet display characteristics that bring in sharp contrasts between the two. We, as the audience, experience the cinematic realm and extract out of them meanings that are structured by our experiences in the physical realm. As an admirer of cinema, I wanted to explore the spaces created in films that are experienced visually. Coming to the aim, objectives, and research question, where the aim is to study and delineate the aspects through which the characteristics of cinematic spaces are structured vis-a-vis the characteristics of architectural spaces. The objectives are to unfold the mechanics of production and consumption of cinematic spaces and to compile the impact of cinematic spaces on the viewer. The research question is, how does a space in film become cinematic? Coming to the operational concepts, where the first one is on the production of cinematic spaces. The cinematic reality is predominantly created through two major developments. The first is the development in space called the mise-en-scène, which is a set of elements put together in a shot to create an experience on the screen which generates meanings. And the second development is in time called the montage. It is a film editing technique in which a series of film shots are stitched together into a continuous sequence to condense or expand time, space, and information. The second one is on the consumption of cinematic spaces, where through mise-en-scène and montage, the space produced in the film gives out multiple meanings that we interpret through a series of signs and semiotics that are implemental in shaping our cinematic experience. So the entire process from the production of cinematic spaces to the consumption can hence be picturized through three screens. The first is the screen of production, against which the elements of mise-en-scène are assembled and the equipments are focused to create cinema. The second is the screen of projection, on which the cinematic realm is projected. This screen may behave as a frame, a window, a mirror, or a skin, according to the consumption of the shot. The third is the screen of consumption, created in the mind of the viewer, where she derives meanings and restructures her mode of perceiving the world. So the criteria of production of cinematic spaces are governed by specific aspects while making cinema. The methodology focuses on these aspects that create necessary mise-en-scène and montage and the role in generating meaning through the film shot or scene. A set of 8 film shots are chosen for this purpose, where each shot accentuates one aspect in the best way possible. The thesis also puts forth the contribution of each of these aspects to make the shot cinematic. So starting with the case studies. So the first film is Pather Panchali by Satyajit Ray, through which I'd like to discuss about the frame. The frame composes the elements of the shot across the screen along the plane of frame and the plane of depth. arranging the elements on the screen and also establishing relationships between the elements as well as between the elements and the viewer based on their proximities from the frame. Hence, the kids running away from the catkin field to approach the distant train speaks of the larger idea of the arrival of the industrial city in the future, which these kids will one day inhabit, leaving behind their present life that is surrounded by agriculture, which the catkins represent. This idea has a much stronger impact on the viewer because, unlike the rest of the film, where the shots are framed at a very human scale, here the frame suddenly increases the scale of the to a gigantic size, the magnitude of which overwhelms the viewer, thus creating a cinematic experience. The second film is Pyasa by Gurudutt, through which I'd like to discuss the effect of light. The scene in study shows a supposedly dead poet arriving at his own memorial in an auditorium organized by those who are benefiting from his works, which the same people rejected earlier. The light is used in a way that it divides the space into three zones that establish an interconnected power dynamic within the space. The three zones with their respective elements are the stage that contains the image, the audience that represents the world, and the entrance where stands the poet or the self. The strongly lit stage makes the image dominate the space, whereas the same light bouncing off the stage and falling on the audience says that the world is under the direct influence of the image's fallacy. This structure is challenged by the self that is at the entrance, standing at the threshold of the inside and the outside, giving a mystical, otherworldly appearance due to the diffused backlight that it receives from the outside. This interplay of power has a much stronger impact on the viewer due to the different intensities of light used to establish each of them. Through this, the viewer is engulfed within the scene and is awed by the overall experience that she consumes. The third film is Alfred Hitchcock's Psycho, through which I'd like to discuss the accelerated montage. The horror of witnessing a murder is escalated through the use of accelerated montage. Through rapid shots, perspectives keep shifting between the murderer and the victim, with the space around the two entities closing in on the action. The montage almost overlaps these perspectives, where the perspective of the victim dominates, creating a highly unstable and fatal space, instigating strong emotions of shock and terror within the viewer in a very short period of time. The screen becomes a mere window through which the viewer is made to witness the scene helplessly. Concluding, from the case studies, it is noted that the chosen cinematic aspects are instrumental in building the mise-en-scène and montage in a film, creating strong emotions and meanings that are consumed by the viewer. A combined effect of them all produces a different reality which we understand as the cinematic. Together, they aim to accentuate the meanings the shot or the scene intends to convey to the viewer. They fundamentally do so in the following ways: reorienting our visualization of space by generating meanings through mise-en-scène, and developing a new spatial characteristics by sculpting time in a film. The cinematic space thus constructed maximizes the emotional impact of a shot or a scene on the viewer, which changes the way we perceive the physical reality around us. Cinema thus provides us with a lens through which we readjust our way of recognizing and responding to our surroundings. To construct the cinematic space and time, these aspects work on the fundamental level of a shot or a scene, which when systematically stitched together, build a film. Similarly, in the physical world, architecture requires a set of drawings for designing space. Although these drawings talk about formal and spatial characteristics of a building, they generally fall short in conveying the emotional experience that the design space intends to have upon us. It is here that the cinematic filter becomes an important lens through which the experiential quality of a space can be reinstated through the drawings. These drawings then enable architecture to use the building elements to articulate meanings and emotions through design and to include the dynamic dimension of time while designing space. Cinema can thus become an important tool which can extend and expand our methods of thinking and constructing space in the physical realm that is governed by architecture. Yeah, thank you.
Thanks, Avdev. Can I request Anshuli to go next?
Yes. Can you all see my screen?
Yeah.
Okay. अरे वो गली में आंटी होते हैं, मुझे नाही पसंत वो देखती है तब, बातें भी करती है. मला आवडतं त्या गल्लीतून जायला, मैत्रिणींशी गप्पा मारायला मिळतात, लोकांकडे काय चाललंय हेही दिसतं. The following two quotes allow an entry point for the thesis on the streets and the relations that the pedestrians have with them. How does difference interplay with affordances of built form adjoining the streets to shape the experience of fear or pleasure? My observations of women who experience fear or discomfort in my suburban neighborhood from different forms of street gaze shape this question. The objective is to map the associations of differences with the experience of streets as public space, and to map the affordances of built form that contribute to the experience of fear or pleasure. The challenge is to open up the associational relationship between public space and social difference. The first two diagrams show how the surveillance is shaped to the porosity in buildings and give an assumption of gaze. The second set of diagrams introduce us to the difference and the desires. The research methodology includes engaging with the neighborhood and asking questions such as what is the character of urban form, what is the character of urban society, what are the routines and their experiences. In addition to the playgrounds and parks, public spaces along the street edges in suburban neighborhoods, along with the building skins, parked vehicles, compound edges, pavements, benches, and other street furnitures around which the activities play temporarily, act as the screens to give a form to the public space. The drawings further unfold the argument. The street edge conditions differ for different typologies. The character of the landscape differs for different street edge conditions. The night illuminance gives a different character to the different streets. The street furniture along the street create a set of screens. These screens are in the form of building skins, landscape, parapet walls, parked vehicles, and benches, which create a sense of affordance. The character of the urban society comprises of gender, class, and age, and their activities and spending vary across these three categories. The neighborhood's urban society comprises of middle and low income and can be distinguished based on the assets they own, the spendings for the dining, shopping, etc. The perception of public spaces for some people are the playgrounds and public parks, but the pantapris, the nakas, utlas of the houses, edges of the compounds also become a public space for the different categories. The routines of movements, places of pauses and escapes of the society differ across different gender, age, and the class. Due to the COVID quarantine, the interviews taken were through telephone and online. A total of 48 interviews were conducted across gender, class, and age groups between 12 to 80, which included teenagers 12 to 19, young adults 20 to 25, married adults 25 to 35, middle-aged 35 to 59, and senior citizens. I would open up the routines of you by people across income, gender, and age. For income, the middle-income man chooses main roads for work or leisure. He likes going for swimming or walks in playgrounds. He tries escaping from the streets which are shaded and are less illuminated. The low-income man works in a shop and chooses both the main and internal roads. He spends his evenings with his friends at the Naka and sometimes goes for a walk with his wife in a park. The shaded places and less illuminated streets do not bother him. The observations for both the income categories is that the both income groups choose main roads as movement routes for work leisure, while the low income also use internal lanes for leisure. The pauses for both the groups include playgrounds and neighbors' houses. However, the middle income associates pausing with gyms and swimming pools, while the low income associate pausing by the pantapris and the nakas. Escapes for middle income are the shaded and less illuminated streets, while it doesn't matter for the low incomes. These interviews are of a middle income male and a female who are young adults. The male prefers the roads for all the movements. He pauses by the edges of the playgrounds or walks in the playground while seeing people. He tries to escape from his neighbors and hides in the places which are shaded and have less pedestrians to smoke or meet people. The female chooses both the roads for movements of work or leisure. She associates pausing by the park edges or sitting in the parks. She tries to escape from the garages, tapris, and also escapes from a neighborhood to meet friends. Following was observed in the routines of the gender. Men and women choose main roads as the routes for work, groceries, and leisure. Women also prefer using internal lanes. Men and women together associate walking in and around parks or playgrounds. Men associate pausing with the tapris, nakas, and places with less pedestrians. Women associate pausing with neighbors' houses and the shops. Men choose to escape from the neighborhood while the women escape from the streets with less pedestrian movement and street illumination. These interviews include a young adult and a middle-aged person. The young adult chooses main roads as he finds them as a faster traveling route. He pauses by the gymnasiums of the playground as escapes from the neighborhood houses. The middle-aged woman is a school teacher, so she prefers main roads for work, but travels from internal lanes, pausing by the houses. She loves meeting people in the neighborhood and walking in public grounds. She escapes from the people on the streets which are shaded and less illuminated. The teenagers, young and married adults choose main roads as movement routes for school, college, work. The middle-aged choose both main roads and internal lanes, while the senior citizens choose internal lanes for all the movements. The teenagers pause at the eateries, compound edges, playgrounds, parks, and escape from the shaded and less illuminated streets. The middle-aged people associate with walking around parks, pausing by the houses, tapris, and the nakas. The senior citizens associate pausing with the parks and neighbors' houses. Both these groups escape from the streets with less pedestrians and illumination. The experiences of fear or surveillance and pleasure or escape of the built form adjoining the streets are relational to social differences and are mediated by the affordances of built form. The experiences are illustrated to the drawings. The street, which is less illuminated and not well maintained, has auto drivers pausing by and young adults, but a middle-aged woman walking by expresses her opinion by saying, "Kiti andara hai ithe? Are he rickshaw wale? Ektila yaila नको." While the young adults say, "यहाँ मिलने आ सकते हैं, लोग भी कम हैं, कोई देखने वाला भी नहीं." The street passing between the row houses has the women sitting, vegetable vendors around, and other passers-by, where a young adult expresses her discomfort by saying, "Walk faster, she's staring at me." While a middle-aged woman sit by the vegetable vendor says, "Agar tiba tithe rahte nahi mulgi," while another woman says, "A kon na wo chokro che." This main road has a pan tapri and the nakas, benches on one side of the road, while a playground on another, and the people of different gender, age, and class occupy the spaces differently. The diagram shows that the screens are an entry point for creating gaze, which are relational to social difference and are mediated by affordances of built form. Based on the findings, I therefore argue that the social difference mediates the associational relationship of individuals to public space along the street edges in Mumbai suburban neighborhood housing. This relationality diverges from the architectural proposition of universal ideas of public space, or its memories in the form of paths, nodes, edges, and landmarks, or even propositions to make the porous built form edges for safety, all of which are in a singular idea of public and community. But the community is formed by the intersections of social differences, and therefore, how can the idea of pause and escape be used as a strategy to retrofit the public space in neighborhood? Or how can the designers consider differences for designing public spaces in newer buildings? Thank you.
Thanks, actually. So with three presentations, just maybe one pointer each for each of the presentations to kind of get the discussion started by the panelists. And particularly, I was thinking about Sarovar's remark yesterday about people finding love in the city. So I think maybe after I made my comments, I'll invite Sarovar to start. So what was interesting about Sneha's presentation was, I mean, while her abstract says that she's interested in looking the practices and routines of figuring out the dreams, I think she takes a very nice tangential kind of entry point, and she basically analyzes the kinds of dreams that one has, and gets a surrealistic kind of a tangential oblique entry point into just simply listing the kinds of dreams that people are recurringly haunted by. And they were changing that kind of, the discussion, not of the object of the house, but rather the space one wants to inhabit, or one wants to avoid. So if you're afraid of something, you want to avoid certain things. If you kind of find pleasure in something, you want to kind of more be closer to that kind of a space. And in Argdev's case, it's a kind of a very methodical kind of reduction of how cinema basically creates a particular kind of emotional intensity, and kind of thereby directing our attention to certain things, whether it is emotional or physical things and he proposes 8 techniques that cinema basically uses to kind of unfold or create that experience, and thereby changing our perception of reality. And that's an interesting thing because, I mean, I'll come back to that point in a bit. And in Anshuli's case, what is interesting is that the experience of, who wishes to be surveilled, by whom, rather than kind of the avoidance. I mean, when she says that there is a preference of one kind of street over the other, or one configuration of street over the other by certain groups, whether it is gender, class, caste, etc. There also appears to be a kind of an inverse logic that there appears to be a projection of biases on certain configuration of streets, whether it is through fear or whether it is through uh, various kinds of things that we kind of project onto the elements of the street, the configurations of the street. And thereby, I think what is interesting for all the 3 is that they are projecting the perceptions of reality, and it's kind of interesting to kind of note that expecting that the projection of reality somehow would change what is real in the given in all the 3 presentations in some sense. With that, I'll invite maybe Sarovar to go first, because finding love is one of our favorite topics to kind of talk about. Yeah.
Actually, I want to just, I don't want to comment on all the 3 immediately. So I'm going to, but I want to talk about the first presentation, which I found very interesting, on working through dreams, which is, in the realm of, as in architecture, you call the intangible, or the fluid, and the illusionary, the hermeneutics of the things. And I think your work was very interesting, because there was the dream space and the spaces that were imagined inside the dream space were both present in your illustrations, which were very, very fantastic. Sorry, where are you? I can't find you. Sneha, right? So it was really fantastic work you did. But what would be interesting is to, there's this book recently I was reading about it. I can't recall the name. I'll send you the name in a bit. About a lady in Germany who annotated dreams of people from 1936 onwards, I think. And she kind of made, and they're very interesting. Like there's an 8th century text called the History of Dreams of Ibn Sirin, in the kind of Islamic frame of things, which is something I also picked up in my field work, because people are constantly telling you dreams also when you do field work in some ways. And what will be interesting for you is to think of and I know you used Freud, and but to think of how would you do a kind of like a spatial taxonomy of dreams. How would you move to give it structure and form, and beyond the social, in a sense, what would be the ways? And of course, there's cinema that helps us in that. And I mean, there are a lot of films made on this. Or Inception, right? And Prasad is going to talk about all the cinematic stuff. Yeah, so I thought it'll be interesting for you to build a frame for the dreams, which can generate thinking about the spatial. I mean, for the change, I'm saying the opposite of what I usually say. Yeah, and the rest of the comments I will give in a bit. Sorry. Over to Shreyank, you put me on a spot. And
No, that's why I gave a little buffer time. I gave my own comments to put
no, I
your-
have like tiny comments, but I have to.
No, I mean, we'll come back to you. No, sorry for that. But I was just thinking about what you mentioned yesterday about finding love in the city. Maybe it has also got to do with the space we inhabit. Like for instance, I live in Andheri East, and my building has a dead end road, and it's often dark. So many people who come to the station, couples especially, kind of hang around there. But at the same time, there are rickshaw drivers being next to them. It's kind of very strange, bizarre, kind of dark world. It's also interesting, right? There's this. It's something that you avoid and something that you kind of look for, and that's why I thought about the comment that you made yesterday.
Hmm.
Uh, I was. I would like to bring Prasad next if he wants to, but particularly. I don't know if you're ready. Like I'm okay with anybody. I was just thinking about the ideas of cinema that you brought in the last lecture, so as a portal to other worlds.
I was no. Again, I mean, I think I'm trying to sort of comprehend and think about all the three presentations. I mean, actually, more than comment, I think it was what it provoked was more of a question, and I think that is also what Sarovar was hinting towards is. It becomes a question of how do you interpret or translate each of these, say, a dream or a cinema or a study of escapes and pauses, right, into an architectural taxonomy, right? And in which case I felt that all the three require a little more pushing, right? Like I felt like the one on cinema. I mean, I understand the study of cinematic image, right? But if you look at the screen which appears in the last presentation, which is also about the escape and sort of the excess and the porosity of the screen, right? Which is also there in a cinema space, right? Like the cinematic image does not necessarily, translate the so clearly into a architectural image, right? So there's also an access to the image. There's a bleeding of the screen that happens in a cinema screen, right? And so how to me, it's not so much that I would want to commend, but it's something more of a question. And I think there is a feeling that I've been getting since yesterday, is that it's a question of method, which I think all the students have sort of raised, is how do you because these are interesting investigations into a cinematic image, into a street, about escapes and pauses and interruptions and routes, right? Like sort of, or even the first one, which is about sort of an estrangement of the space into a dream space, right? So how do you kind of produce a method or an investigation to translate that into an architectural investigation? I don't necessarily have an answer, but it's something of a question that I thought that is interesting to take up. So I'll stop here. I mean, one thing I do want to say is that they're all very good drawings. They're all very interesting projects. They're all, the drawings are actually quite beautiful in all the three. So that is something that I did want to say. But it is more of a question to all of us, I mean, including myself. And I think that is where all of us are also struggling to comment, because I think there's sort of a, kind of the pushing here a limit of how do you, translate something into an architectural investigation. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, thanks, Prasad. I think this is also something that Vishwanath was pointing yesterday as well, the question of method. And Vishwanath, do you want to go next? Like,
Yeah, sure. Well, so Yeah, I would like to take further this question of drawing, because I think, like Prasad was saying, very interesting drawings in all three. And I was just wondering how one could take this forward. Uh, uh, and it was very fascinating that all three of them were drawing in very different ways. So I would like to comment on all three drawings and the relationship it has to the project that they are trying, the research that they are trying to do. And in that comment, I found that I felt that two books would be very pertinent. One is Alberto Perez Gomez's Architectural Representation and the Perspective Hinge, where they're probing the possibilities of using drawing as a poet, what they call poetic translation rather than prosaic transcription. I find that very fascinating. And the other is Robin Evans' The Projective Cast, which is also looking at the idea of perspective versus the idea of flat drawings and therefore screens. And in that context, if I look at each of the three studies, starting with Sneha, uh, I must say that the drawings by themselves are absolutely beautiful. I loved, simply loved all the drawings. And I was wondering that if one is using drawing as a projective tool in order to understand architecture and hopefully going ahead in order to design as well, how would you how would you go about translating or sort of gently nudging this kind of drawing into uh, design of space? And to me, it is you should start exploring that. And I would take, if I were you, I would take each of these paintings of yours and sort of start tinkering with it, um, without having any specific agenda or without having any specific steps for transforming it. So I'm not saying directly try to convert it into a three-dimensional space or form. uh, Otherwise I felt I was in fact expecting that after that first set of paintings or visualizations that you're making of the dream, there would be something else which would tie it back to the question you were asking about, what is the dream house? um, and although in the beginning you rightly sort of pointed out that when you asked people about the dream house, it went into a completely different direction, and that's why you went into dreams. I thought that that was a very good move. um, but I think the onus is on you now as the researcher to somehow try and connect it back to what does this all mean for you if you had to design a house. I think that step is next very critical. um, and I know that you'll be doing that in the next semester, but I think that tinkering should begin. Uh, in the case of Arkdev, I would like to pick up from that one drawing that you made of the three frames, where you were saying that there is the actual set in which the uh, uh, movie is being shot, and then the cinema screen is a frame. And because in I think in your aim or research question you were talking about what is this correlation between the cinematic space and architecture, I would like I would I was thinking that you would add one more frame to those three frames of yours, as to if that is the conception of space in cinema, whether it is the Piazza movie theater, or whether it is Psycho's bathroom. If that is the conception of space in cinema, what is your imagination of if I had to translate it as architectural space? Because one of the fascinating aspects of cinematic space is that the set designers and even the directors and cinematographers are extremely comfortable with making incomplete space. So the idea of enclosure is not very important for them. What is important is the nature of enclosure that can be portrayed within the frame. And so to me, that fourth frame in that drawing of your imagination of what the architectural space could be like, I think would complete the whole circle and tie that the cinematic aspect to the architectural aspect. Now, coming to Anshuli's thesis on the screen and the gaze. So when you were initially describing using those plan drawings, I was quite I was wondering why you have chosen plans to explain what people feel like when you're moving in the street. Of course, then you shifted to a more sort of elevational or part perspectival drawing. But one thing I felt that you could actually explore much more is the whole idea of the apparent dimension of things versus the actual dimension of things, and the difference between the gaze and the screen. Because the screen, in a way, presents the flattening of three-dimensional reality, whereas when you're walking in the street, when you're describing these people walking in the street, the apparent size of windows or behind which there might be people gazing at you, depending on how far you are from the window, completely changes whether I feel I'm being watched or not. So I was just intrigued by the fact that the elevational kind of drawing and the plan drawing is being used. I was wondering what would happen if I use some sort of a perspectival drawing in order to talk about how the idea of the gaze changes depending on where you are in the street, vis-a-vis where the other people are sitting and watching you or not watching you. So in this sense, I felt that I find lot of potentials in all three of using drawing as a medium to probe further or explore further, and more sort of attempts or trials and errors using drawing as the primary tool of researching. Yeah, those were my comments.
Just sorry, Shank. I
please
had
go ahead.
you know, on the second presentation, Ark Dev. Sorry, I'm sorry if I'm saying your name wrong. What is interesting also from Vishwanath, what Vishwanath was saying, you know, this whole notion of set design, and I think somewhere one side you have you know, people like Tarkovsky and others who use the outside the space, whether, you know, from like what Ivan's childhood type of things to Solaris, which is spatially somewhere it's expansive space, and then they generate an affective out of it. And the other side you have Roy Anderson's sets, which are literally crafted, like what Vishwanath was saying, you know, every part of it has been crafted out. And I'm just putting a small film for you here. Sorry. Oh, I don't know. I just loaded that film. So it's very, and in fact, this is something I actually teach. I mean, I think architecture students, one of the things that I always say is that you may not actually work as architects. You may become set designers for Bahubali 4 or Game of Thrones. You know, I mean, let's be in the reality of things. And as part of design theory, in fact, I have taught a lot of ideas on set design. And you guys are lucky you're in Bombay, that you can actually go on sets and see the kind of, there's a layering that happens, and there's a engineering that is going on of set design, right? We worked with a set designer last winter when we were there, and she was saying the whole weight of all the cameras and people. First, you have to think of the weight of the set, and it's held up on a certain number of things. So I think you did done a very interesting. I mean, of course, Pyasa is a classic to open out, and but to also then look at films which you generate an affective in internal spaces versus external expanse, and how the set is then broken into another kind of a horizon or a field, right? Would be interesting for you. I had another thought, but it's again slipped my brain. A Neuer for the second third person. I think there's a lot of, I think in your work, it would have been interesting to think of a kind of a Neuer genre to feed into the, I won't call them tensions, but the shadows that you were trying to bring out. Sorry, it was Ashwin. Sorry, wait, yeah. Anshuli. Sorry. So, yeah, I think there is an element of the cinematic in all three, of course, right, as the section is. And I think you can have conversations with the cinematic in different way. Even in the dream section, even so that there is a the cinematic space, its effectiveness, and it's feeding into what you are trying to break open or understand. That's what I would say.
Thanks, Arvind. So what I'll do is I'll just maybe just quickly highlight one point and then ask the respondents to take that also as a response to two important things that came out in the responses. One is both Sarovar and Prasad were also hinting that, actually they were hinting, but they were expressing that there should have been a method or a framework to which you guys could have developed to kind of translate the understanding or annotating of dreams and cinema into some form of an architectural investigation. So first question is for you guys to get and respond is what is that kind of architectural investigation? And I think in Vishwanath's response there was a kind of sort of an allusion to looking at also drawing as a method of two kinds, which I find them very interesting to think about. One is the poetic translation, where how do you kind of indirectly hint at something, versus a prosaic transcription of something. If I'm getting the second one right, where you basically serially describing things from various perspectives. Often, what Prasad also cites as what Prasad and Rupali cite is kind of a Salman Rushdie view of the world, where everybody's reading a pixel for themselves, and then you kind of project various pixels to each other and communicate and to get a sense of what that reality might be. And that also reminds me this kind of a distinction between surrealism and cubism, where the Picasso's paintings are flattened out with various profiles and various prisms of an object, versus, let's say, a surrealist artist who kind of get an oblique entry point towards the reality of things, never making it explicit. I think these two kind of distinctions are very powerful and very interesting. The question is, how do you then translate these distinctions and these understandings that you guys bring to the table into form of an architectural investigation? So any of the three who are present here would want to respond to that? Maybe Artev, maybe beginning with you, and then we can go to Sneha, who's very, very far from, let's say, this kind of a physical, architectural space, and then coming back to Anshul. Just one point to highlight would be that all the drawings are done in an absence of field study. So they're all done at a distance in any which case. So so that's probably something that you would want to bring in when you're responding to that. Yeah.
So for me, the idea of drawing is it completely starts from when I am looking at something, what I am extracting out of it, how I am how I'm consuming it, and then finally how I'm interpreting and putting it out on a canvas, which we actually call a drawing as a noun. So to take it further, I would again, the drawing for me is a process which continues, and the illustration part is just a just a part of the entire process that is there. So even this what you're asking is how do we translate it into an architectural thinking. So it also comes in the same process of drawing out something that I have seen, and then again, I have to think upon it further, how to put it out perfectly into an architectural context and discourse. But the thing of the idea of drawing, I think it covers the entire process of from the beginning to the end.
Maybe Sneha, you want to jump in?
Yeah. So for my process of the drawings, I think, and I would like to respond to what Vishwanath had to say earlier about the connecting link of this type of drawings and the dreams to what people had to say earlier, is I think what their everyday life experiences and their routines are, and how they shape their dreams, and how in return their dreams shape and change their lives. So I think that was the connecting link that I was trying to establish through this kind of drawings. And yeah.
Anjali?
Yeah, so the question that why were the plans being used for drawing the routines? So actually the plan was firstly made to show the urban morphology of the site around, which shows the build form and plans and the streets and the pockets within the neighborhood, and through which the routines are clearly being shown. Also secondly, that since the interviews weren't taken actually meeting the people and knowing, they were taken through phones. So to locate those interviews and them telling me through the phones, the plan was an a way to show the routines.
Thanks, Anjali. I think the question that Sarovar and Prasad raised, and also Vishwanath mentioned yesterday, something for you guys, for everyone actually, for us, it is important to kind of figure out more interesting and rigorous methods to push ourselves to kind of not easily give away into what, like how Vishwanath was saying. Like, it's not about just designing after you've analyzed something, but how do you translate this kind of investigation into some sort of an architectural investigation? Where does that overlap with the zone of architectural thinking or architectural practice, or whatever? Not to kind of make a very hard line distinction between the two. Since there is Jibesh in the panel, in the audience, if you want to add something to this, what is interesting about, many of your works are about projections, are about the screens, and also located between the strange world between, the artful and the knowledge. So, would you like to kind of maybe comment on something here?
Yeah, I had a comment of I think what is interesting that all the presenters have some intuition, and then that intuition goes into some strange direction. I will just be a little bad. I ask you to become a little bad boy, not like the billionaire bad boy. They're ugly boys, like bad boys, and say that add horror. So if you are looking at your screen and you add a little horror, you have one problem that horror produces, which is the limit of the human agency. I think all of you are trying to locate the human agency is very central. And that's where I think that's where the vanity of being an architect versus the practice of thinking architecturally is colliding. So if you say the train in Pother Pachali has a life independent of that shot and it keeps on running, it's the train that is running. Okay, so there is an element that is escaped human agency produced by the human. Okay, and the dream is a classic, and we are grown up with Bikram Betal. We have the Betal. Betal is out of rhythm. Betal on our shoulder always. So to say that we don't have a betal and everything is under the control of our human agency, and if you in psycho, it's the dagger, it's the knife. So you say that the knife is just a prop, then you get into trouble. The trouble is that which has a propulsion of its own is being tamed in the theoretical proposition. Okay, take for example the present situation, we are all looking at it as virus. Okay, the virus has escaped the imagination of the human agency. Not only the human agency, it is running through our infrastructure, through both the non-human and the human. It is taken the human as a load by which it is traveling, but it has escaped our infrastructure of acting on it, as well as our way of understanding and comprehending it. That's the whole thing of the human agency. So I would just say that add a little horror in your work, add a little something that the agency of which you cannot comprehend or reapprehend, and then come back to this question of what does the drawing do or what does the projection do. You know, one thing continuously, that client is not the only non-human agency. You know, it's actually whole lot of the world that we are inhabiting is that agent, that non-human, or the kind of created by human, but we have lost it, comprehension of it. And that's where the interface between thought and practice, I think there is no field in that sense. The field is like us in that fundamental way. But Sarovar is saying, I'm the field. It is actually a very poetic line, actually, because self-scrutiny is now gives you the breakdown of the category. So I would just request them to be a little bad boys and add a little horror.
Yeah, not the Vijay Mallyas of the world.
They're ugly. They are not bad. That's why I have a problem with that. They're ugly people. They're people who live off other people's money. That's not the. That's where the problem, you know, discursive problem is. Like
true. Yeah, I think what you're saying also is that, you know, there's a reality for all things around us beyond what we can actually conceive of them, and I think how do you kind of let those realities take over sometimes? That's the horrific part of it, because they can take over at any moment.
Yeah, because, you know, like Guru, that's doorway you showed that shot. It's the doorway. It's that producing a self as a demigod darshan, you know, and that's the intuition of his transcendental, that he wants to transcend that moment cinematically and existentially also.
Yeah.
So it's the doorway. It's not the Gurudat. Gurudat has vanished. It's the doorway that stays there. That's what I'm saying. You know, like if we as practitioners don't give those inanimate world that force that it has on our imagination till now, at all points, then we are losing out on our craft, you know, losing out what we are doing.
Vishwanath,
yeah. I just wanted to also bring out the fact that the word projection here, one is projection of the cinema world, but even in architecture, the orthographic projection, any projection is actually projecting some things, bringing out some things in the forefront, and by that very same act is also hiding some things. Whereas what we have come to believe is that the parallel projection, that is the plan, is the most explanatory or revealing of all architectural drawings, whereas the rest are not. That the rest, the perspective, the non-technical perspective, or multi-perspective drawing like a Mughal painting is somehow lesser or hides more. Whereas to me the plan hides as much as a perspective. It's just that what it hides and what it projects is a different set of things. And I often find that a lot of people use plan as a tool, as an explanatory tool. The assumption is that if I show you a plan of something, I'm revealing everything as is, because I'm giving actual dimension of things. Whereas any other projection is somehow revealing less and hiding more, which I think needs to be questioned, which that whole act needs to be, or that whole thought needs to be engaged much more. We need to discuss more what is the plan hiding, as much as we need to discuss what is the perspective revealing. And I think to me, in some ways, some of the studies, I come back to Anshuli's study. To me, in Anshuli's study, that becomes extremely critical and an interesting question to ask.
Yeah, Prasad.
No, Lantian is there. I saw his comment. Dipti, can you make him one of the speakers? Can you give him talking rights? Lantian, you want to come in? Lantian, are you there?
Hi, hello.
Hi. How are you?
Good, how are you?
Good.
Yeah, sorry, this is a little unexpected, but why not? I just wanted to recommend a few films, architecture films, which I think are listed in the Q&A. Zhang Yimou's Raise the Red Lanterns, Ozu's Ohio, and Wong Kar-wai's Chungking Mansions. And I was thinking about these films came to mind as you were all speaking, and I mean, what occurred to me is that the relation to the screen or to some kind of let's say the camera as a device in the films, they're not observational devices. They're not drawing insights from the spatial. They are drawing spatiality itself. And if you think about like Ozu's Ohio specifically, so much of the kind of what's in the air, what happens between on-screen protagonists is rendered not through the set design only, but through the whole host of blocking techniques and whatsoever that the camera produces. And in fact, you can see the entire film as a kind of treatise for Japanese metabolism, like in terms of the treatment of spaces. And I wanted to call attention specifically to this film because it presents a nice kind of moment that kind of overlaps some of the different strands that have been brought up, which is that it produces this kind of like imaging of a built environment, and makes a relation between a TV, like a CRT tube TV, from which we get the the pixelation Shriyank was talking about in terms of this kind of like image pressed onto the CRT screen, and it presents a relation between the box mass of the television and the box of the standardized whatever mid-century Japanese room, and it produces a material relation between the wood paneling that's used and the kind of 4-meter span of that, with a kind of idea of additional kind of modular growth in terms of an environment, and then produces a linkage between that and the television as a screen, as a portal, but also as an object in an interior. And I just wanted to point to that as an anecdote, because also if we're thinking about cinema, then I would say in addition to thinking about whatever revered masters of the form, I mean, people in cinema are not thinking about Tarkovsky now, right? Like, we're trying to think about TikTok. So it's like, what my question for the architects is like, not what you think of Tarkovsky, but what do you think about people who think about Tarkovsky thinking about TikTok?
That will be a horrific moment. But yeah, Prasad.
Thank you for the time.
Thanks.
Lovely comments. Lovely comments.
It was nice. No, I was thinking all three of them. They're really about opening the mechanics, the mechanics of how the dream is kind of, dream happens, and what kind of space it kind of, points to, or how does the cinematic space happen, or how does the walk happen in a neighborhood, so it's opening up the mechanics, and all three of them in methodologically I feel also are similar, because they the first thing that they do is decomponent, open up the components, separate the components, and then they do it through interviews, or they do it through kind of, opening up the image. In case of Anshuli also, it's opening up the components. And when you dismantle the components, I do not want to use reconstruct. Basically, look at it as components, and then now there is a specific method in which most of the works, even yesterday and today, on this morning, they're kind of doing that, and I think there should be I think that way of approaching the mechanics through identifying components, separating them, and then figuring out relationships. I think that process brings out a certain reading. There is a definite relationship between the reading it provides and the method that is employed in doing that. I'm just thinking, what are the other ways of kind of looking at mechanics, or opening up mechanics? What are the other ways of kind of do narrative forms open up mechanics? Other forms of looking, what are the ways of looking, what are the ways of kind of and there is, I think this is something which we should think about in school also. What are the other ways of, this is a classical way of opening. You open up the components, see the relationship, and then kind of try to rebuild it as a set of relationships, to understand what is happening. But is there any other way of doing it? So that's what I was thinking.
Yeah, Rupali, you wanted to add something?
Oh, sorry. I just wanted to say, I think just to kind of bring back some of the discussions we had also yesterday, that, some of these methods kind of allow you to open up and sort of look at this idea of, we used the word earlier also, rupture, like to kind of rupture a certain sort of imagination of architecture being sort of fixed in time, or, in some ways being held in a frame or a category and all of that, right? I think in this method, it's also important to sort of push that reading of the rupture, So for example, when you're reading the dream, in some ways there's actually a lot more in that dream than what Sneha is reading, because then it still comes back to kind of reading a consumptive idea of the table, which has the food on it, and the money that is kind of overflowing. But there's so much more in that if you start reading those layers and the ruptures that this kind of reading produces, and she brought this idea of the erotic and other things, but maybe that kind of reading needs to get a little thicker, or for example, in Argdev's case, looking at what falls outside that frame, that the kind of edges of the frame, or in Anshuli's case, starting to look at the categories of people she kind of looks at as not so sort of rigid, like people who sort of fall between these categories. What are, what are the kind of various aspirations and in some ways liminalities of those categories that she kind of so neatly puts forth. So I think that kind of the moment of rupture that the method itself allows, I think requires a slightly deeper sort of reading, and which will be useful to sort of push forth.
Yeah. Anybody else? Yeah, Prasad.
Yeah, no, I was actually just sort of thinking about what Jivesh was saying and also what Rupali was saying. There was this piece on Benjamin, by Adorno, where he talks about, what is the method in his work, and he says that, it's sort of pushing yourself so close to the object, as if you want to kind of taste it and smell it and sort of, allow it to communicate to you something that you haven't really seen yet, or haven't sensed yet. And also what Vishwanath was saying, drawing. I mean, drawing can also be a way of reading, but to allow the sort of like at this point you've kind of stopped at a moment of that you have a presentation, you've done your drawings, right, and you've kind of sort of stopped at that point and want to figure out what comes next. But I was wondering if you keep sort of pushing yourself very close to what you're studying, right? Like you start, redrawing the same dream again and again over a period of time, say, right? Or you keep drawing the same screens and projections or the routes on the street, right? You kind of keep doing it over a period of time, that kind of it sort of push the intensity of the method to a level where that what Rupali is saying, the moment of kind of rupture happens. Because it's not, because I feel it in my work also, is that it doesn't come so easily in the sense that there's a clear formula to when something happens, right? Like the method is sometimes, because when you're drawing and when you're writing, there's a certain virtual element to it which we can't really grasp, right? Like, the moment of where the writing or the drawing kind of takes over and you can't really figure out exactly what that, mechanics of it is, but there's something virtual or magical about it where it starts telling you something that you haven't seen yet. And I feel like, that because it's kind of ended at, these beautiful drawings, but they kind of need to be sort of, kept on, sort of, drawn over and over and over again, where you kind of, something starts appearing which, in those objects or in the dream that you haven't necessarily seen yet. I was also thinking in terms of, that there's this idea of the tectonic unconscious, right? Like there's something architecture, like unconscious in the architecture also. That also has to be read in some ways, right? And what does, how does the dream unconscious sort of relate to the architectural unconscious that we haven't really, explored?
Anybody else? I mean, while somebody's gathering their thoughts, I also kind of was thinking maybe it's, I mean, in the recent history of architecture, it's not that architects have not investigated in the cinematic space or about the cinematic space or about, let's say, desires or the horror or the fear. But one can think of Shumi's first book, I think Manhattan Transcripts, was all about the kind of devising architectural tools to kind of from cinematic techniques, the montage, the cut, the flash, what is it called, the flashback or the flashback, no? All those techniques that that are used in cinema typically. One can even think of as weird as it is, Libeskin's work on the horrors of Holocaust and how it has kind of shaped his architectural thinking. Koulas's Delirious New York is a kind of a surrealist reading of Manhattan, and it's making the whole oeuvre of Hedu and others who kind of work with this kind of animate or this kind of the animate in the inanimate, the kind of animal in the inanimate in some sense. So in that sense, there are several references which are coming to my mind when we were discussing around how can one kind of bring not very easily, but through, like what Prasad was saying, to kind of serially trying to redraw till you kind of that there is something out there, but you can't really get it so quickly, maybe in the time period that you have, but to kind of continue to develop that that process to try to get as close as possible to that that hunch that you have that maybe there is something out there, and your writing or your drawing in this period of time has kind of let you be short of that, reaching to that what he's calling the virtual or the magical, there is, you guys, I mean, in some sense, you know, there is something out there, architecturally speaking, in this project, but for some reason you haven't just kind of, you know, either got a interesting kind of angle to it, or an interesting approach to it, or like Prasad was saying, maybe you haven't figured out the mechanisms of it. But I found some of these architectural, you know, or maybe references from architects. Just four come to my mind. I'm sure there are several who have investigated into this aspect. Anybody else like Apurva, Anuj, Rohit, Dushan, Dipti, who would want to kind of add something to this? Sarovar, maybe. It looks like we are. Oh, Rohit, you want to add something?
No.
All right. So I think any of the participants want to respond? Are they Anshuli, or any new questions that come to your mind? Sneha. Looks like we're out of steam on this topic. So
not questions, but right now you mentioned Shumi and Kulas.
Yeah.
Even John Haydock comes to my mind, you know, in to fit in that panel, and his playful idea of creating those huge, humongous toys and structures.
Maybe just you're absolutely right. Edu is definitely a very interesting reference, and just really want to add one interesting. Sorry for the background noise, but one interesting thought that comes to my mind pertaining to the idea of limit that Jivesh was hinting at. That limit in the sense that there's a finitude to human, thought and human thinking and human understanding, and objects have their realities beyond what we can perceive of them. In that sense, there is a tradition of formalism in architecture, which is also interesting, also in art, which works with this kind of limitation very, very consciously. But I think Hedu's work also kind of start from that formalistic exercises, even Shumi's, to a lot extent, and kind of add a twist of the weird or the magical to the formalism, which is very, very interesting as an architectural method. And lastly, I mean, of course, everybody knows that Kulas was a filmmaker before he became an architect, and kind of the use of mise-en-scene in his work as a technique of producing architectural space itself is also interesting. Maybe something that you guys want to look at. Yeah. So yeah, I think that generally very interesting panel discussion. I think we are ending.
Shank, can I say one?
Yeah, yeah, Jivesh, please.
Because this is to Rupali's, and because Rupali 4 years back now, she saw this slaughterhouse in Shanghai.
Oh, yeah.
And that became a very interesting trope for us to think. And I remember I was in a big meeting with very big people with a lot of, tell us what you think about how this exhibition would look. I said it looked like a slaughterhouse from Shanghai, and they were kind of stunned, but actually what it communicated, the word slaughterhouse communicated, and that it is an architectural space communicated. So I'm just, like, because Rupali has talked about, and Prasad also talking about this opening up, one of the very interesting Bergman, there was a long interview with Bergman, I think it's the last long interview with Bergman, and he was talking about cinematic as a process of opening up to him always was a kind of a wound. But he would say that, today's filmmakers knows how to open up, but they don't know what to do after it. So, like for Rupali, it is a rupture. But I think opening up is a process that is very indeterminate. I think one panelist said about this uncertainty and indeterminacy. And I think this indeterminacy and uncertainty, theoretically, in categories, we don't capture it. And this is something that my long-term conversation with my architect friends or urbanist friends, or, that what do you do with this opening up to a rupture? You're moving towards a rupture. And then you do not have a categories by which you can capture it other than predestined categories. So the indeterminacy and the uncertainty comes to you. and then there is a excess, there is a flood, and then you don't know how to. And I remember one of my friend, his mother left when he was 16-year-old. His mother left and with someone else, and he said he could not understand that mother would have sex with someone else and had a complete breakdown. So the rupture is not necessarily a site of a knowable self, that I know of myself how I will be in a certain time, or knowable of even, he's a very radical guy, but knowable of even your own limits of radicalism, who you are at some level, or what kind of prohibitions you are keeping within yourself when you're producing the idea of and opening up. So I was just saying that this, all these all the three projects had this lingering move towards it and then a withdrawal. That's why I said they're good people, they're good boys, saying they're good girls and boys. That lingering move towards that dream space that can go uncertain, or that window, someone seeing you can actually detour you into your life journeys, or even the projection to that rupture, that kind of uncertainty of practice. And I think it's in the panel, it is coming up. We can start from there rather, like what do you do with indeterminacy of research? Where do you go? Do you close it? Do you leave it at? And that's, I think, Prasad, and in this, I mean Prasad Kanolkar, his work, which I saw in JKK, had that element, that to find a form of indeterminacy rather than categorically close it. I think all of us could share that somewhere. Even Rohin's work on Ullasnagar has that, and that the continuous masquerade of logos, and this continuously produce an indeterminate move of players whom we are not very sure how they will locate themselves in the economy in the coming time. Those kind of things, I think, would be interesting for these students to bring into their work. Thank you.
Thanks, Dipesh. I think what you're trying to push for is to kind of how do you make this whatever thinking or research into a more speculative and more relevant to the times and to the kind of changes that we are seeing today. Interesting for you guys to keep in mind, I think. Unless there are no further comments, we still have about 25 minutes.
No. We don't have.
We don't?
Done.
Done?
Yeah, long ago.
Oh, okay. I thought 1:35. No. Oh, sorry, 1:15. My bad. My bad. All right. So we'll meet after lunch. Thank you everyone. I think there's some really interesting takeaways for everyone to kind of think about architectural investigation and how do you build a framework for that. 2:30. Yes, we meet at 2:30. Thanks once again. See you all after lunch.
So 2:30. 2:30.
Yeah. 2:30.